Hi, I'm Wilbert Roget. I'm a composer for video games such as Call of Duty World War II, Mortal Kombat 11, and I will be at Soundtrack Cologne. I've been a musician playing piano since as long as I can remember. Maybe I was 4 years old. But it wasn't until high school that I kind of really got into video games, and it was Final Fantasy VII. Um, that was the turning point where I decided, hey, actually, I want to write music for video games, not just play them, but actually participate in their creation. Um, and ever since, I was writing video game music. I mean, back then, this would have been like the 1990s. So I think the first soundtrack I ever wrote was in 1999. It's very crucial at the beginning of the compositional process that you figure out what your form is going to be for that piece. Whereas if you're following a linear media that's already it's already in front of you, form doesn't really it's not quite as important necessarily because it's already established by the edit. Like the edit dictates the form, whereas scoring for games is actually a lot more like scoring for the concert hall in that the form is exceedingly important for how music will be digested. You know, oftentimes games will require something in the way of adaptive music implementation and whatnot. But I never really let that drive the form or really anything in the music. I like to focus on just write a piece of music and make sure that it works, and then start worrying about, okay, here's how we're going to dissect it for the implementation. Um, I've never liked the idea of starting with the implementation as if this is like, okay, this is how we're doing it, no matter what, and then trying to find a way to shove music into that direction. I'm just not a huge fan of that. Letting go is very hard. Um, and what I mean by that is saying, okay, this piece of music is as done as it's going to be in the time that I have allotted with the resources that I have allotted. It can be very hard. It's a natural thing that I think across um, all medium, especially in music for picture. We all deal with it because we're on a deadline, we're on a budget, and as a composer, obviously you want every single piece to be as good as it can possibly get. But sometimes you have to take a step back and say, okay, well, this is the reality of what I have available to me. So how do I make this absolutely as good as it can possibly be, given those constraints? And honestly, a lot of times having those constraints results in much better music because you come up with creative, clever ways of doing things that you wouldn't have thought of before. You know, I think with Mortal Kombat, it was the worst. I've had to apologize so much to our audio director because our audio director is one of the classic Mortal Kombat composers. He's just kind of gotten promoted from composer to director now, I guess. And you know, I would see these cut scenes, and we would have our spotting sessions, and some, you know, there's a lot of like fan service in this game, lots of little nods to previous entries in the titles, and I would just be like, "Oh my goodness, I can't believe you did!" You know, it was an incredible experience. I mean, uh, you know, Mortal Kombat is a huge, or was a huge part of my life growing up. Um, it's kind of my first video game in a way. The first game that I ever played in the arcades, and you know, I just sat in front of that arcade machine for just hours on end, thinking, "Man, these graphics are so real! It's so real! I can't believe." And of course, you look back, it's ridiculous. But at the time, you know, it introduced me to video games. It introduced me to the martial arts, to, you know, big parts of my life, and it had a huge impact.